Hello, my friend. Thank you for being here for another episode of the Be You Get Paid podcast. I wanted to do a quick intro and mix things up a bit for this episode because we have hit double figures with this one, episode 10. And I'm learning a few things as I move along this podcasting journey that I think are possibly worth sharing with you. So on a number of these interviews, I've noticed, and it's probably not a surprise, the best conversation quite often happens before and after I have hit the record button. And this chat with Jake Woodhouse, was one of those occasions. And I was a bit frustrated on my last episode with Dale Warburton because he shared some amazing dreams and goals that he has for his Bitcoin journey later on. And I'll perhaps share those on social media separately. But Jake Woodhouse is someone I have been following since getting deeper into the Bitcoin rabbit hole. He's someone lots of other Bitcoiners recommended to me. Always a good sign in my experience so far, which is when I discovered his podcast, Bitcoin with Jake. And not long after this, I was asked to host a panel at Bitcoin Alive, which was here in Australia in April 2023. It was the first Bitcoin-only conference in Australia, and Jake was one of the MCs. There were two of them, and we had about 300 people at the conference, and Jake just told me before recording this podcast that he'd never done any public speaking before, which frankly blew my mind because I've only ever emceed a friend's wedding and it is a hell of a responsibility and a little bit stressful. But Jake and his co-MC JP looked like absolute seasoned pros up on stage and ran this event like clockwork. It was brilliant. It was so well done. And that got us talking because I told him, I assumed he was a professional MC, and he said no. He was very humbled and flattered to be asked to host as an MC at the event. And it really only came about because of his visibility on his newsletter, his podcast, and in his words, from making a lot of noise about Bitcoin on Twitter. Anyway, my point in relaying this to you, we'll get onto the episode shortly. My point in relaying this to you is that everything I am here for with Be You Get Paid is essentially, please just get yourself out there. Do not be afraid to share what you're passionate about on social media, your opinions on anything, because Jake is yet another example of what is possible in terms of opportunity presenting itself when you're willing to do that. We do discuss his take on this in a lot more detail during the podcast, but I just wanted to pre-frame it here because I didn't hit record soon enough to set the context on the full conversation for you. And in future, I'm just going to hit record as soon as my guests join me and capture that gold to share with you in full. Anyway, enjoy the episode with Jake.
I inherited wealth in my 20s. My father, he sadly died, shout out to Dad, of a heart attack, January the 1st, 2009, completely out of the blue, age 48. And 18 months later, we sold our family home, which had been in the family for 3 generations. I was the eldest son, and I didn't see a future there for us, and for me particularly. So for the last, at least 10 years, I've been trying to figure out how do you protect wealth over time. And I came across Bitcoin. I first bought some in 2015, but really it was a tiny allocation. I ended up making much bigger moves 2021, 22, 23. And so now of investable assets, I'm about 90% Bitcoin, 10% cash.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Be You Get Paid podcast. I'm your host, Amy Taylor, and I have one goal by being in your ears: to explore as many conversations and perspectives as possible on stuff we did not learn in school. You know, stuff that would have actually helped a lot more of us thrive rather than just survive as grown-ups in an often challenging and ever-changing world. As the title might suggest, this includes anything involved with knowing ourselves, understanding money, and generally anything that might offer some insight into how we can all be happier humans. With that in mind, wherever you're listening, you'll find links to some of the best resources I have personally found to help with all of those things. Sometimes I'll talk about these in a bit more detail, and I want you to know I will only ever recommend products, services, and companies that I am a customer or user of myself. Now, we're all grown-ups here, and as such, you'll possibly hear the occasional use of grown-up language. More importantly, anything discussed here is personal opinion and intended for conversational and educational purposes only and should not be taken as financial or investment advice. That's the housekeeping done. Let's get into what I hope is some helpful chat.
It was really good.
What a day. Shout out to the team that set up Bitcoin Live. It's I can't wait for next year.
Yeah. Where are you based now? Because I was just listening to that podcast before and you were in Melbourne. Where are you now?
I'm in Melbourne.
Oh, you are still in Melbourne?
Yeah, so my wife Lauren is from Melbourne. So
okay.
we moved here in December of 2019 and have been here for almost 4 years now.
Yeah, okay. So you didn't, I was just listening to what you said about your experience of the lockdowns and everything, being in one of the most locked down cities in the world. And I was like, oh, surely they've moved.
No, well, this is the funny thing. Even with what was some of the most egregious behavior from a government I've ever known, the worst, actually, without a doubt, we're still here, which is funny. And it's made me question a lot of things. It's made me research a bunch of stuff I wouldn't have looked at before. And I'm still living here. And I guess well, I did an episode with Dr. Jack Cruz on my podcast, Bitcoin with Jake. And Dr. Jack, he was like, you got to get the fuck out of there, mate. What are you doing thinking about having a third child? Like, that's absolutely ridiculous. There is nothing more important than teaching your children about freedom. And you need to go and live in El Salvador. And I was like, whoa, okay. Like, fair play. I appreciate an opinion, but also, you know, when you get taken slightly off guard by someone, you're
totally,
like, it's really fucking having a go at my decision making. Like, wow,
yeah,
I should pay attention.
It doesn't help anyone, right? And I just watched your little 5-minute final episode a couple of times actually, it was really helpful. I'm so glad you did that because, you know, you're doing a podcast. You know what it's like. Like I'm doing this. I have the luxury of time, but it's taking me away from what I should be doing as a core focus, but I love it. And you said in your review, you know, podcasting, especially doing it online, having conversations is what the world needs, but doing it online especially teaches you to listen more because you're dealing with tech delays and, you know, I think the world needs to get better at that. And you've just given the perfect example, like someone attacking your decision making. I'm with you. Like we're both Brits. I left the UK on and off many years ago when I started like my 20s and 30s traveling, save up enough money, go, come back, work, save, travel. And it used to really bug me when other expats would slate London or slate the UK. I'm like, look, it's home. If you've chosen to leave, fantastic. We have the freedom to do that. But I think where a lot of Bitcoiners are quite extreme with their opinion on get the fuck out, it's like, well, hang on a minute. That's just creating the same problem in different countries. Like, surely there's a case for fighting for freedom where you are. If you feel that strongly about it. I've got family in Melbourne who aren't Bitcoiners, who, we can get back into the COVID conversation. But shameless plug for where you're at now, because tell me what you're doing now with Bitcoin Advisor, because partly it's a shameless plug, but Peter and Andy are fantastic. They've been so helpful to me. Plug that, tell us what you're doing right now, and then I'm going to circle back to something that I think was really interesting that you might have forgotten about. So tell us what you're doing now, who you are, where you are. I feel like Cilla Black. Who you are and where you come from.
Yeah. What's your name and where did you come from?
Yeah, that one.
Well, my name's Jake and I'm originally from Dorset in the UK. So I grew up on the South Coast, and I won't make this too long a story, I guess, but I'm now part of the founding team of a business called the Bitcoin Advisor. And the Bitcoin Advisor is a business that's born out of a problem that I personally felt. And that problem is, if you are managing a portfolio of investments and you're looking to protect wealth for the long term, the natural story in my mind is Bitcoin becomes a larger and larger, not just allocation of your portfolio, but your mind share. This is my personal experience. I've just got more and more interested in what the fuck is this thing? Yeah. And if you're moving large amounts of money into Bitcoin, you need to know that if the worst thing was to happen, that Bitcoin goes to who it needs to go to. So in my personal instance, I inherited wealth in my 20s. My father, he sadly died, shout out to dad, of a heart attack, January the 1st, 2009, completely out of the blue, age 48. And 18 months later, we sold our family home, which had been in the family for 3 generations. I was the eldest son, and just I didn't see a future there for us and for me particularly. So for the last, well, at least 10 years, I've been trying to figure out how do you protect wealth over time. And I came across Bitcoin. Well, I first bought some in 2015, but really it was a tiny allocation. I ended up making much bigger moves 2021, 22, 23. And so now of investable assets, I'm about 90% Bitcoin, 10% cash. And if you do that, in the traditional financial world, you might have a money manager, you might have a portfolio of real estate. If you died because you got hit by a bus, your solicitor will be friends with your accountant, who'll be friends with your money manager, who'll be friends with your real estate manager. And your will state whatever it states. And it says, more often than not, a trust will be created on your death. And that trust will control the assets that will eventually proceed to move to your beneficiaries. And this is all stuff that I learned when my father died.
The hard
Everything
way.
went to a trust. We had to manage the trust. I was the beneficiary. And in the digital world, in the new era of Bitcoin and wealth protection, this just hasn't been built yet. It's not clear who owns what, how does it work. If you get hit by a bus tomorrow, how do you know that your Bitcoin will go to your kids? And the Bitcoin advisor is essentially a tool that helps people solve that problem. Very specifically, I met with Peter Dunworth, my now business partner, in the end of 2020, and I was doing due diligence on a platform called Unchained. Unchained have a multi-sig vault for Bitcoin, which means that they have 3 keys. They keep 1 and the customer takes 2. You then have to place those keys in different places. You've got to have then the backup seed phrases to them. You've got to coach your wife, your partner, your kids, your brother, sister, whatever, as to how to use this stuff. In my personal case, I had a key with a local vault business in Brighton here in Melbourne. My wife didn't even know where the vault was. Like if I was to get taken out, the Bitcoin would have been where it was supposed to be, but no one would have understood how to get it.
It's like the crystal maze.
So yeah, it's and you hear these crazy stories of people that did early GPU mining and threw a laptop into a waste bin, and now it's in a dump somewhere, and it's worth $1 billion. All sorts of stories of basically bad processes with a new thing, which is digital assets. And so we, as the Bitcoin advisor, help people manage their multi-sig vaults. So we tend to use Unchained in the background, but we could use different technology if we chose. And I signed up with Pete as a customer of his 2 years ago. And so I pay Pete 1% of Bitcoin under management per annum to look after a key. So Unchained has a key, Pete has a key, and I had a key. And really what the Bitcoin advisor is a step for Pete and I, and Andy as well, who completes the team, to let's say professionalize our friendship. And I am a walking, talking cheerleader for the product that Pete has built. And I believe it's the very unsexy final piece of the puzzle for people to store large amounts of value in Bitcoin in a way that you can sleep at night. So I hope that describes what the Bitcoin advisor is and a bit about what brings me to the table.
100% it does. I mean, it's probably more relevant to people that are already in Bitcoin, who are perhaps so many of us, I think, are in the situation where it's like, okay, the pressure of self-custody, which is absolutely what people need to do. But then it's like, okay, what next? And like you said, it's coaching or training people that you trust enough in your life to know what they're doing. In my case, a lot of mine would be going to my mother, who is 76 and gets in a strop about her phone not working properly. So the thought of trying to tell her what to do just stresses me out. So you're bringing a brilliant thing to the world. But what I wanted to start with in terms of our chat is the fact that I was just listening to the podcast of you, it was January 2022, and you were a guest. It wasn't one of yours. And I don't know how long you've been talking to Peter about potentially becoming a business partner, but you essentially forecasted the role in that conversation that you now have. Was that intentional? Have you been talking to Pete about working with him for that long, or was that just something you've forgotten saying? Because I thought that was amazing. I was like, Jake's just started this new role. And 2 years ago, he pretty much articulated, wouldn't it be great if this existed? So is that coincidence or was it intentional?
Complete coincidence. I don't remember. So that you're talking about a podcast I did with Daniel Prince,
Correct.
Which is 18 months ago now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember saying that specifically, and that's hilarious that you brought that up because have you ever come across something called human design?
Yes. Oh, very much so. I've done it. I've been coached through it.
So
love it.
I recently had a human design done, and for anyone listening that doesn't know what that is, my very poor understanding of it in terms of the functions in the background is they're looking at all sorts of things, but specifically they need information, which is what day were you born, what time of day were you born, and they look at certain astrological markers and they can figure out what kind of human you are in relation to the rest of the population.
Yeah.
And my main human design is something called a manifestor, which is roughly only 10% of the population.
Yeah.
And that basically means that I can create reality from what I think, which is crazy.
Well, you have.
Yeah, it's and what you've just explained is exactly that.
Yeah.
So I've been playing around with manifesting things, so doing affirmations on a daily basis, like what do I want to create, and whoa, it's very powerful. This.
Yep.
I don't know. Cool. Okay. What a great place to start from.
Yeah.
So yeah,
well,
great.
And if anyone
I've created my reality.
Yeah. And if anyone is in the human design exploration, it's like I would say it's a mashup of astrology. It's like your horoscope on crack plus psychology plus ancient Chinese wisdom. Plus there's so many things that have gone into it, designed in the 70s. And I've done it. I have a coach who I've worked with through other programs called Prue. If anyone wants a recommendation, she's amazing. I might even tag her in the description if they want to go do human design. She's in Australia. And she was brilliant at working through that with me. But I don't know too much about manifestor. I'm a generator.
Okay.
But you maybe go back and listen to that clip. It was quite near the beginning, but you were articulating the need for and you'd done some work in startup because I think you tried to get a couple of your own things off the ground. And you literally said, you described what the Bitcoin advisor was, which was a concierge service that helps people custody their Bitcoin and plan an inheritance plan based on your story.
Yeah,
I was like, I wonder if he already knew he was going to be working with Peter, and it was just really cool. So I thought that was a really good place to start because it very much relates to what I'm trying to get across to people, which is, when you talk to people nowadays, we'll come back to Bitcoin. When you talk to people nowadays about how happy they are, how their life is going in the real world, if they could change one thing, if you ask them that question, I found anyway in the sort of solopreneur, online digital entrepreneur space, the first conversation you normally have with people is, what do you want? Like, what is the goal? And it's usually one of two things. It's time or money. But yet the time and the money nowadays is rapidly evaporating or passing anyway. And people are no clearer. They don't want to invest any time or money to learn how to improve that very problem. And it becomes this self-perpetuating thing. And what I love about your story is, well, not what I love about it, it's the hardest way to learn, is that people normally have to reach maximum pain in either time or money before taking that seriously. So in your case, you lost your dad. I've experienced personal family grief time and time again, 3 or 4 people, immediate family members. And I think that really does hit you in the face and kind of go, well, you were 20, you know, that's still extremely young and possibly not as wise as you'd like to be when that happens. But, you know, you didn't know Bitcoin then, so it forced you into investment because I guess you became the man of the house. Some people would hate that expression nowadays, but you were responsible for investing your family's wealth. Were you the executor of your dad's estate? Like, how did that go? Like, it forced you into investment, which presumably is how you've ended up on the path you're on, because you've learned a lot about that.
Well, there's lots of things to draw on there. First of all, I'm sorry for your loss. It's bloody difficult working out, you know, how to live life when someone's gone. You just don't understand death as a human somehow. It's just like, what the fuck just happened? So yeah, I mean, just to take a moment to reflect on that, it's a very, very testing time in your life. And I did my best to ignore it in many ways, like get drunk, take drugs, not, you know, take my career seriously. And all those things, they, eventually you kind of grow out and grow past them. And time is the one thing that helps to heal, and it doesn't become so raw as it was in the past.
Yeah.
Interestingly, just this weekend, someone commented to me that in some ways I'm lucky that my father died. And I'd never heard that before. And it's extraordinarily contrarian. I would swap everything for him to still be alive, of course. But just to talk through what we meant by that when we were having this conversation, it's very friendly. As you said, I was forced into a position of financial responsibility at a young age. Now, to be very specific about what happened, the value of the house, roughly half of it transferred into a trust, which was to be used as a way of generating income to look after my mother. And that's still in place. And what that looks like today is my mum, my brother, my sister, and I sit on an investment board, and we manage the trust. And so we make investment decisions together about how best to look after mum. That has lots of connotations in terms of my mother was effectively passed over in dad's will as a financially responsible person, and everything was put into a trust. And she then had to deal with her brother-in-law and her close friend, but my father's best man, and she had to kind of put decisions past them. So she lost all autonomy of decision making, which was extremely difficult for her. And equally, like, we were thrust into positions where we had to make decisions that we didn't understand the full ramifications of what we were doing because we were so young. Some of the value of the property did end up in my hands at the age of 25.
Yeah.
And with that, it was mine to do what I wanted with. So I didn't have to ask anyone any permission to do anything. It was literally just ended up in my bank account. And then it's like, okay, what are you going to do with it? Because I was the eldest son, I got more than my brother and sister did. And they were given theirs on reaching the similar age, so around 25.
Okay. Yeah.
I understood that, and they've approached their journey differently to mine, interestingly. Where do I go with this? I mean, the very obvious thing that I luckily learned was that saving and investing are not the same thing. And in order to save, because of inflationary monetary policy, you have to invest. You're forced to make investments.
Yeah.
What people are not told is that investing carries risk. And risk is actually incredibly difficult to quantify. And even extremely good full-time investors don't understand risk, like in some cases. So the average person, because of the financial system that exists today, is thrown into this ludicrous position where they can't save money over time. And so they have to become investors. And when they become investors, they're suddenly part-time investors alongside being doctors or being, teachers or being plumbers
Parents,
or being whatever they're doing, right?
Yeah.
It's ridiculously hard to protect your wealth over time. But yeah, so that's what I was forced into doing. And so in some ways I'm lucky because I had to take a first principles view of the world and say, okay, Jake, figure this out. And I didn't have a 60-year-old boomer influencing me in my decision making that I could always turn to and say, Dad, what do I do about this? Dad, what do I do about that? Dad, how do you think this through? They weren't there. So there was no one to ask, and it was not mum's area of expertise. So I literally had to figure it out from scratch. And what is cool is that took me to Bitcoin. And so I now understand Bitcoin very deeply. I understand investing well as a result of having some good and very bad investments. And it's super simple. Like, Bitcoin solves all of that bullshit. And you can just buy the stuff. If you secure it in self-custody, that's the best way to protect your energy, protect your time you could ever have hoped for.
So it's such an interesting story. And again, like, you would give anything to have your dad. The first person I lost was an uncle who was like a father figure to me. And there was a bit of inheritance stuff involved there. I'm not going to dive into that now. It wasn't left to me. It was left to my mum because he didn't have children. So it's there's a lot of parallels I totally understand. And I get what you're saying. Like, it's not lucky, but you've certainly made the most or done your best with what the cards you were dealt. And I think that's really impressive, because at 25 or 20 to 25, like you say, drinking, taking drugs, doing all the things that you do when you're that age. You went to university in Leeds, by the way. I saw that somewhere. So did I.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, what a great town. Love that
Great
place.
city. I didn't actually get a qualification out of it, but that doesn't matter. It was still fun times. So yeah, it's just
they're useless anyway. So
exactly nowadays anyway. But it's interesting what, like, again, do you think if your dad had been around, you called him a boomer, do you think if he had been around and you'd, I don't know, come into a sum of money through other means, what do you think he would have advised you to do with it? Because it sounds like he had his ducks in a row, like January 1st, Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
like,
by all accounts he did, yeah. Great question. So Dad was born 1960, so he's right at the tail end of being a classic boomer.
yeah.
But so he loved real estate. So he would have been long real estate without a doubt. And it would have been about, generating yields and therefore having incomes and having, good maintenance programs in place and having a decent accountant and offsetting it using trusts or using different kind of tax loopholes. That would have been his primary goal, I imagine. But I couldn't say. I don't know. I would have obviously been trying to orange pill the shit out of him, being like, you've got to look at this Bitcoin thing. You've got to look at this Bitcoin thing. And he would be like, whatever,
But you may not have been into Bitcoin. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I would have had, he would have sprinkled some breadcrumbs in that sense. So there would have been, like, on his death, we lived in this beautiful property in Dorset. There was a cottage on the estate that was in my name whilst I was at university. And so when we originally sold that property, I did inherit some money. It wasn't a huge amount, but that was already a step in that direction. So I'm sure there would have been other, goals that I was given, like, have you thought about how you invest and have you, considered what you would do with your money? I also went into the shipbroking industry and started earning good money very quickly because I was a good broker. So by the time I was 27 years old, I think I earned about a $50,000 bonus one year. That was predominantly tax-free sitting in Singapore. So you're in your mid-20s, you just boom, got $50,000 in your bank account. Like, you have to figure out what to do with that as well.
Yeah.
And I've still got lots of friends who are shipbrokers, and interestingly, they buy fine wine, they buy classic cars, they buy real estate, they buy stocks and shares. They're all trying to figure out. There's a huge community of white collar workers that make fucking good money, but they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And everyone's like spreading bets all over the place, but really, like, it's incredibly difficult to navigate, and lots of them end up losing their money. It's just crazy.
But you're also losing time. And this is kind of the theme, I think, of a conversation with you, because death is the ultimate end of time for any one individual human being, and we never know when that is coming. But for the rest of us that are here, and, people spend so much time either trying to figure out, like, I know all the friends myself and my partner have got our age, particularly usually the guys, are spending a lot of time reading about investing or trying to figure it out. It's not filling their soul. It's not lighting up any kind of creativity. And they're probably in jobs that they're not particularly passionate about either. And that's the thing that I'm really passionate about, trying to just get people to wake up to. It's like, if you hate your job and you're spending all your spare time outside of your job simply trying to figure out a way to make enough money because your job isn't enough, or you want to get out of it, like, it's just, where's the joy in life? And I feel like, you are completely absent. And
it's tough.
I was similar time to you. 2020 really went down the rabbit hole. Like, I was all about stay home, follow the rules, comply. And then there was a point, I can't remember exactly where it just did not make sense. And then you go down I'd been into Bitcoin in 2017 as well, but lost money. And like, a bit like you may have been in it a long time, but along the way you sell some, you might still be paying attention, but the human greed takes over, or what else could I be doing with my life that's more enjoyable than staying in the books? And I think the time piece for people is, you've now got children, is what's sad, is looking around and people are doing their best to invest and be sensible. But it's like, but you don't get to hit pause on your life whilst you play that plan out. You're going to wake up in 10 years and those children that you were doing all this for have left home. And that's something I'm really trying to sort of, I don't know what the answer is. Bitcoin is one of them. But for you, just to sort of switch gears a bit, you started talking about Bitcoin, right? So when you were working in shipbroking, and it's only now that you've sort of got a role working in Bitcoin, as it were. So when did you have a social media following prior to getting vocal about Bitcoin? Because you've got like 7,000 followers or something on Twitter, and you've got your newsletter. I don't know how many subscribers you've got there, but what I'm a voice for is just people doing their own thing, either with a job or going all in on something of their own. because it's your pure passion for Bitcoin, and people don't have to be talking about Bitcoin, but a lot of Bitcoiners are. You know, look what it's led to ultimately, and you did manifest that, which is really interesting to me. So when did the newsletter and the podcast and the just being vocal about this thing that you became so passionate about, when did that all start?
Well, I think I sent my first newsletter in August of 2021. And I did that every week for about 9 months. And during that 9-month period in April of 2022, I started my podcast. I was also working full time and trying to be a parent. And so the newsletter got ditched in favor of doing the podcast, which was, I was creating original content rather than kind of analyzing other people's content, which was the theme of the newsletter. So I'd take 3 stories I'd seen that week and dissect them. I would have listened to the YouTube or whatever, and I'd talk people through what I thought about that particular piece of content. So I thought it was more interesting to go down the unique content production route. But to, I guess, scale it back a bit, it doesn't really matter what the subject is. If you come across something that you find that you're learning about in your spare time and you can be paid nothing, but you spend all your time consuming this subject, then getting out or working into your day-to-day research some kind of content production plan is very sensible. And in my case, that has without a doubt led to being one of the critical factors in becoming a business partner in the Bitcoin Advisor. I'm essentially the marketing front end of Andy, who's a sales and operations and tech expert, and Pete, who's the product lead and financial advisor. I've basically been making some noise about Bitcoin, and it's like a kind of homing beacon in the digital world. There's all these conversations going on at different times of day all around the world on different subjects, and there is a tiny niche in the world of people talking about anything you want. You can consume that content if you choose to, that's no problem. But if you start adding to the conversation in some way, then you can build a business out of it, basically. So I will, without a doubt, forever be grateful for the decision to start a newsletter. To answer one of your queries earlier, I have 180 email addresses on that newsletter, and they were pretty much all sign-ups that happened over that first 9-month period, and I haven't pushed it since. With the podcast, I think I'm pretty much at around 30,000 listens or views across YouTube and audio since inception. So that's total. So about 30,000 people. Well, that's not fair. It could be the same person twice.
Okay, say
it's
half.
Crazy
then.
when you start looking at the different audience members. They're in, I think I had someone in Liberia, someone in Nepal, someone in a random Pacific island I'd never heard of before. People listening to your content, like, what the hell? Actually, I made a presentation at the Beechworth Bush Bash about what I call digital leverage, and I mean, maybe I can look it up right now. Hang on a second. This is interesting. So.
I love this. Like, you just articulated
content,
everything I want people to pay more attention to. Like, it's...
Yeah, well,
I'll ask you some other questions,
no
but
problem.
that's impact. That has impacted 180 people, potentially 30,000 people.
180 emails, but this is the one I like the most, Amy. Give me 1 second and I'll have a look. So my YouTube channel, I've got 384 subscribers. I started it in December. I have had, I don't know how many views it is, but total watch time is 125 hours.
Yep.
Is that right? No, that's the last 28 days. Hang on a second.
Let's have a look. I'm getting
Sorry,
a
this is
calculator
slowing down
ready.
the conversation slightly.
No, it's good. But this is a huge part of what I do, is giving people
so my
numbers.
YouTube channel alone has had 27,000 views since inception. Now, bear in mind, I haven't really created any content in the last month. But total watch time is 2,500 hours. That's crazy. So I put out there 80 episodes, of which most of them are 1 hour. So let's, for rough sake, call it 100 hours worth of content. So 25x my time of recording has been consumed on YouTube. And that's
Yep.
then not including Spotify and Apple and all the rest of it.
Mhm.
So I describe that in my presentation as digital leverage.
Yep.
And we can put in, let's say there's some production time that goes into that episode, and then there's some promotion time that goes into it. And because you're passionate about it, probably tons of other hours that you forget to account for. But roughly speaking, I'm making 25x return value of my time to someone out there. Now, monetizing that has been extremely difficult in terms of creating sponsorship contracts with companies and following up for payment. And, that's a whole different ballgame, is how to monetize it. But certainly from a perspective of making some noise, learning a huge amount, creating a new network, and building the life that you want to have, then absolutely, you're bang on. It's been hugely valuable for me.
Yeah. And I mean, the get paid piece for me, when I talk about or brand myself as, saying BU get paid, it's like, whether you get paid or not in monetary terms, you've just outlined all the other things that you're going to get from it. It doesn't have to look like money. Ideally, it does. And Bitcoin is perfect money. And that's where I'm kind of going with how I can add to the conversation. But, the growth and now the business opportunity, you are getting paid in monetary terms. You've created a business. It's taken less than 2 years. And you are building the life that you want. You're still in Melbourne. You haven't had to move. That geographic location challenge for a lot of people, that they think they've got to move cities to get a better job, or they can't live near the ocean because there's no jobs here. It's awesome. And you've been such a great, I'm glad that we're having this conversation when we are, with the timing of you starting with BTC Advisor, because it's perfect. You're demonstrating what's possible, and it's been less than 2 years. And just simply figuring out, I mean, you were led to it by, your life's experiences, but I just think it's worth people listening. Like, you don't have to wait for someone in your life to pass away before you start taking that stuff seriously. And everyone's consuming something. It's just whether or not you're going to start producing, because it feels pretty good. Like you say, when you see 30,000 views or 30,000 downloads, or when you actually look at some numbers, if everyone in the world was doing that in some way, it's extremely fulfilling and it's extremely impactful. And it's how Bitcoin gets adopted.
Well, Amy, it brings to mind something very relevant to that, though, which is, in the Bitcoin space, we talk about being your own bank. And it's like, what do you mean being your own bank? That's fucking mad. Why would you do that? What happens if something goes wrong? All these reasons why you wouldn't do it. But ultimately, that's what I'm doing. I'm being my own bank. And it's very empowering. It made me think about being your own brand. And that really is that's what I did, right? So I had a social media platform that I could use to promote myself, which was Twitter. I had a production back end, which was creating newsletters and original content through one-to-one interviews. And through being my own brand, and opportunities come out of that. And in some ways, absolutely everyone should have their own brand, like digital picture of themselves, digital conversation that they like having, digital network of friends. Like, being in a geographic location is just the most bullshit excuse for not doing anything. Like, come on. There is a whole world of people out there online all day long. People want to talk about Bitcoin all day if you wanted to. And so I love that concept, like being your own brand. And it's something that, anyone out there who's listening might want to run with. Go for it. I think it's very powerful.
It is powerful. And it's interesting that you're saying, you have the ability to be your own brand. You are one anyway, whether you're consciously and intentionally putting content out there,
Absolutely.
or you're just interacting on social media anyway. You are one. People have an opinion of you. People relate to the things you say. Like, I've kind of, like I say, been in career/brand limbo myself since discovering Bitcoin, because it's all I want to talk about. But I've started to see the dots joining between, what I was doing before, which is helping people build digital businesses, because they either need the extra income or they're sick of what they're doing. But what used to be an optional side hustle is fast becoming a reality as a necessity for people. But also, people are just disillusioned. They don't know who they are. They don't know what they want. They don't know how to make the shift to make enough money. But the beauty of Bitcoin is, you don't have to, not everybody is an entrepreneur. Not everybody wants to be super active on social media. What I love about Bitcoin is, it's when you fully grasp it, and you're an example of that too, is when you have money that is deflationary, and we're getting into Jeff Booth's book territory, it might be a bit high level for some people, but you can just have an average salary and not have to worry about the future if you're on a Bitcoin standard, because it holds its value. So it's not about everybody becoming a visionary or everybody becoming a personal brand, which brings huge opportunity, whatever you're into. I found a community the other day that was passionate about ants. I had like an ant fetish. It's like, you really can talk about anything and monetize it.
Anything.
It doesn't have to be Bitcoin. It's just, I have found that so many people in Bitcoin are passionate about it, but they also have these other skills that they could be talking about. And it's being able to join all those dots. But yeah, it's when the beauty of Bitcoin and just better money is enabling people to have their salary job that they don't hate, but they can kind of stay in it, feed their family, not worry about the future, relax and be present. Have you got anything that you'd share on that? Because it's certainly done that for me. It's breathing space.
Yes. So I describe the more, there's a common saying which I like, which is in relation to Bitcoin specifically, which is the more you know, the more you buy. And that's very common through basically everyone I've met in the Bitcoin space. There's not any investment out there that takes that same mantra, because the traditional investment thesis is generally speaking about diversification. It's like you do not want all your eggs in one basket. And that's fair enough when all you can actually put your eggs into are baskets like government debt, so owning UK gilts, or if you've got to buy Coca-Cola, which is an equity, or if you can buy foreign currency like the US dollar. These are baskets that ultimately have counterparty risk, and therefore having your assets in these different baskets is not worth having them all in one. And this requires work, but the more you know about Bitcoin, the more you realize, well, the counterparty risk is arguably the lowest I've ever seen, right? It's a computer network with an algorithm that's backed by this insane amount of computing power that could be wrong. We could all be fucking wrong. Absolutely. But when you look at the other options that are out there, then, whoa, okay, interesting. Counterparty risk is very, very low.
What have you got to lose?
And then it's like, okay, well, what am I actually doing here in terms of why am I investing? Well, I'm investing because I want to retain purchasing power over time. Okay, why do I invest? Okay, well, I think that I can outpace this inflationary environment by owning equities, and the CPI is running at 7% or 9%, and I've just made 15% in the stock market. Okay, well done. You've outpaced inflation. That's what you need to do. The truth is, though, most money managers cannot beat inflation, especially when you run the inflation numbers at what I think are the real rates of inflation. Look at real estate in central urban areas. Is it going at 7%? A lot higher. And there are all sorts of data sets that you can get hold of that show that the real inflation rates is up in the high teens in many places. And why? Well, 40% of US dollars in existence were created in the last 5 years. Okay. Anyway, long story short, Bitcoin is digital scarcity. So if you buy a portion of 21 million, you cannot be inflated. And this is a massive, massive thing. And really what Bitcoin represents is a savings technology. It's not an investment. It's a type of money. And that means you have to ask the question, what is money? And if you haven't asked that question, you're never going to get Bitcoin. So anyway, to summarize slightly, the more that you learn, the more you buy. And that really, really helps with this whole discussion, because it changes your aspect when it comes to time. And so now I'm very relaxed. Like, I've got my value in Bitcoin. It's held in self-custody. So the counterparty risk is fuck all, in my opinion. And the retaining of purchasing power over time is better than any other asset I can own. So you've got the best of both worlds. And so if you are someone out there that is able to save some money on a month-to-month basis, and you don't need that money for between 3 and 30 years, and you want to put it somewhere that doesn't have a large amount of counterparty risk, and you can put it somewhere that you think will retain value over time, Bitcoin is a brilliant solution for that. So you no longer need to be a part-time stockbroker or stock picker for that matter, because you're not broking them, you're actually buying them and owning them. And that's a huge amount of time that disappears from requirement on a week-to-week basis. So you get to spend more time with your kids. You can be more present. And so it applies for anyone who's just a wage earner up to people that are allocating capital. And it's a massively important moment for mankind. And just no one's yet realized, which is crazy.
or not enough people have realized. And I think going back to some of what you just said, I'm just thinking about the average person in my audience, or what I believe, who I believe they are, would even have just lost you. You'd have lost them with some of your terminology there, because you are speaking in investment terms.
Pick out something.
Yeah, I wrote down
that
data
resonated with you.
sets. So when you were talking about CPI and inflation, what you're referring to with baskets and data sets is, ignore the mainstream media. You should be doing that anyway if you want to be happy, as far as I'm concerned. But, look at the cost of things that actually affect you as an individual, because I don't drive very much because I work from home. So the price of petrol is neither here nor there for me. But it's massive if you're someone who's driving to Brisbane from the Gold Coast every day, which is, where I am, every single day, and the fluctuation of something like 30% in the cost of petrol. Well, that's relevant to you. So it comes back again to the individual circumstances. Who are you? Be you, figure you out, look at your situation and what you want, and whether or not carrying on like this for the next 5 to 10 years, if you're in your 40s, carrying on like this for the next 25 years, how's that going to look if these things keep happening? Because it's not like just since COVID, everything's gone wrong. Do a little bit of history checking. Like, this has been happening for decades, for centuries even, and you said something in another podcast where you shared articles with people, or you started having conversations, as we all do with our friends and family, about Bitcoin and the other things happening in the world, to try and get them to question things. And people are so attached to their view. So Melbourne, lockdowns, COVID, mandates, whatever. And they'll send you back an article that says XYZ that they probably haven't read themselves. But yet they'll send it to you to prove that that's their view, and they're holding on to that. And it's like, well, again, we're back to time and money. How much time are you losing by not changing something? But how much time are you losing just holding on to this view that's not serving you, that be applied in many areas of life. But have any of the people that you found gave you that response, have they come round to Bitcoin or anything else? The waking up to, well, hang on, that's wrong. What else is wrong? Or is it just that slower process?
Well, I mean, a higher level response is quite a simple one, which is that when people fail to course correct when the information changes, that is a severe lack of intelligence in my mind. And it's just deeply frustrating. It's like, hang on, how can you still not have any interest in digging deeper into this conversation?
Yeah.
The hard part is, like, I try not to get emotional, and that's really hard because you get passionate about it, right? And you're like, God, you fucking kidding me? You still banging that drum? Okay, I'm not interested. So in some ways, just the natural bias is that those conversations, they disappear because I don't want to have them. Yeah. And if you're not going to think the same way that I want to think, then I don't want to hang out with you. So naturally, there's like a kind of a self-selection or a self-censorship process that happens, that you just go, whatever, I can't be bothered to even try and explain.
Yeah.
But saying that, like, compassion is important, and meeting people where they're at is important. So it depends what day of the week it is. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes you get angry and pissed off. You're like, I cannot be asked with this person. The next time you're like, I really should try and explain to them why I think that. But I mean, Bitcoin particularly, I think the most important thing we can do is to think about, well, what problem does Bitcoin solve for someone? And so come at it from like a problem analysis perspective, and what's their biggest day-to-day problem. So for the problem case you're currently talking about is these people that are working crazily hard, and you're trying to encourage them to take up more of a digital position and start leveraging their skills online to create communities and then potentially create financial gains in the future in the same way that we've played out today. But they're time poor. Like, they're already working full hours. They've got kids at home. Now you want them to spend an hour or two a day doing this? Like, you kidding me? How's anyone got the time to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, well, why haven't you got any time? And they'll often be like, oh, because I have a job. Okay. And have you got more time now versus 10 years ago? No, less time. Okay. Do you know why that is? And they go, oh, because of, the cost of everything. Okay. So you're having to work harder because of the cost of everything. Okay. That makes sense. Why is the cost going up? And you can kind of go through the step-by-step process, I think, of like breaking down, ultimately, someone controls a money printer. They can print as much money as they want when they want. They give it to their mates first, and we get it last. And it means that your 80 grand a year buys you less shit than it did 10 years ago. and your rate of pay will never have increased at the rate of inflation because companies would go bankrupt if they tried to.
Yeah.
So that is the problem with money today. What if there was a solution out there? Would you use it? Yeah, I'd use it. Okay. Have you looked at Bitcoin? And so you don't even talk about Bitcoin until the very end of trying to dissect why costs are going up and how inflation exists.
Yeah.
So that's just one example.
Yeah.
But, I mean, through my podcast, I was lucky to speak with people who, for example, shout out to El Sultan Bitcoin. He grew up in Caracas in Venezuela, lived through hyperinflation, and then see what happens. Right.
Yeah.
So there's very different use cases that people need to find a solution for. And it's really just a case of thinking about, well, what's the problem you're trying to solve for someone?
And I think there's a lot to be said for the fact that in Western countries, going back to the original point, time and money, like I feel like unless people feel that maximum pain in one of those areas, time being death or money being Venezuela waking up and finding out that a loaf of bread is now $1,000, like, is that what it's going to take for people who are essentially too comfortable because there's not enough pain? And I think there's a Tony Robbins, this has come up a couple of times with conversations around this stuff. There's a Tony Robbins quote that's the pain of change is less than the pain of staying the same. So if the thought of, still being in this situation in 10, 20 years for someone who's in their 30s or 40s right now, that needs to be more scary than finding 2 hours a day to either learn or produce content or just start doing something that has you feeling better about your life and gives you hope. Yes, exactly. Oh, wow. Awesome stuff. You've articulated so many things. I think you've covered most things. Your answers to a couple of questions that I normally ask people would probably be quite a powerful thing to hear, even if you've already said them. So rewinding to, I guess, let's say 18-ish after school, because I often make the point, so many things we didn't learn at school, money is one of them. What advice would you give yourself around using a voice, speaking up, sharing your opinions, being you? And what advice would you give him about money? Let's say prior to losing your dad, because you were forced into learning a lot that I think most of us don't.
Well, it's all part of it, to be honest. Oh, what advice would I give the 18-year-old me in relation to money? I guess it would really just to be trying to teach like a mindset, and that mindset would be one of curiosity. So ask questions. Don't be afraid to keep asking questions, and alongside that is to then be patient. So it's not helped, the fiat world, like patience is just not something it really caters to, right? It's not just the consumerist culture that it supports, but also we don't have a lot of time, and so patience is something that is rarely kind of actually used. But with enough curiosity and enough patience, then you'll find yourself in valuable places. I wish I'd known that whole time, because I tried to manufacture success from nothing in too short periods of time, and then would hurt myself mentally about it. You're not succeeding. You've made mistakes. You're wrong. You're bad. You're not good enough. And it's all very unhelpful, negative thought processes that ultimately they're just slowly kind of hamstringing you, and you lose you run the risk of harming your long-term growth. And so, yes, be curious and stay patient.
So to younger Jake that covered off money and being you at the same time, I guess, like to the younger Jake that thinks he's not good enough, what would you have said now?
Back yourself.
Oh, you've literally, so many people have said that exact thing, which it's so true. Like for how long it takes. And again, to go back to watching your journey and where you found yourself, and we'll tie up again with Bitcoin Advisor, like less than 2 years ago, you just started sharing your opinions and your thoughts on Bitcoin, and replace Bitcoin with anything you may be interested in or have an interest in. And people are doing it anyway on social media. They just don't do it intentionally, realizing the opportunities it could open up for them. I've got friends who share pictures of their runs every day, or I've got family who, my brother in Melbourne he's in his 50s and he's into triathlons and Ironmans. And I'm like, you need to share more about this, but because it's inspiring, but it's just, people are doing it anyway. and you don't necessarily have to monetize it, but you can do it from a place of passion, figure out that actually means enough to you, that you're already putting time into it, because time and money to us is all we have, really. But
yeah, it's all we have.
You have a choice. And
time, money, energy is kind of the same thing as time in some ways.
Exactly.
But yeah, those are the basic ingredients.
People think time is money. It's not. Time is energy, and so is money. And we now have a choice with money. We never used to before. You have a choice on how you spend your time. You now have a choice with what money you use. And yeah.
Well, I think actually some people would argue they don't have a choice on what they do with their time because they have to work. And they're saying, I can't do what I want with my time because I'm spending all this time working. So somehow that's then connected to the money, right? So if you start saving in Bitcoin over time, you will have more time because you have to work less. And that's this kind of like beautiful symbiosis that kind of happens.
Oh, we could so
something
have
that's
it
resonated for me quickly, Amy, that, that I should mention. Do you want to wrap it up now? I mean, I've got another 10 minutes.
Keep going. By all means, keep going.
Okay. So that story that you mentioned of me talking about the kind of the Bitcoin concierge product should exist on Daniel's podcast 18 months ago. So the experience that I had using wealth managers, so these are traditional investment houses in London in this case, but they're all over the world, helping high net wealth families to protect their wealth. You will go to a very nice swanky office not far from the Bank of England in the city or wherever they might be based in the West End of London. You know, the secretaries, everyone's in suits. You sit down for a complimentary lunch. You get given a piece of paper, which is basically a summary of your portfolio and the performance this year. And you get this whole presentation as to why they did what they did and how brilliant they are at their job and, you know, how amazing you are as customers. And thanks very much. That is a very, very high touch, yet traditional wealth management relationship model. That doesn't exist in Bitcoin. But a huge amount of wealth sits in the hands of those people. And in my mind, the traditional financial advisor is not doing their job because they're not beating inflation. And if you look at the performance of most people's portfolios over the last 5 years, they're not retaining purchasing power year over year. So I've been in meetings with these managers and I say, what are you doing about inflation? And they literally said to me, one of them, we can't beat inflation. We recommend you buy a 2-year-long government gilt, UK debt, essentially. That is a 3.5% per annum return. But because they've got a tax incentive in place, you don't pay any income tax on it. So it's effectively a 7% return. And even that doesn't beat the 9% CPI in the UK, which is also a doctored number, right? It's running in the teens for sure. So these guys aren't doing their job properly. But what they have done is they have developed a status quo for relationship management with traditional wealth. And so what I always thought was a good idea was having a very high touch relationship model with people in relation to Bitcoin. And so I actually have my family trust invested in Bitcoin now. So I've been through a process of taking a trust to my brother and sister, my mom, and explaining to them why we need it. And many conversations, particularly with my siblings, as to why we had to do this. And they were just like, no, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. No. And we got there in the end. And shout out to Tatty and Rex for letting us do that. But the point being is that I always envisaged the product that I'm now building with Pete. I just didn't know exactly what form it was going to take. And I do believe there's a lot of people out there that they're just not willing to trust themselves with these keys. And as a result, there's already a cost of doing business, which is the 1% money manager in the Bank of England or nearby. So why wouldn't you also pay someone to help you with Bitcoin? It's not a difficult sell at all. And in my mind, as a customer of this, I prefer a 99% upside with a 1% cost. But I'd know that if I get hit by a bus, my kids get my Bitcoin. I wasn't necessarily looking to turn that into a pitch for the Bitcoin advisor, just more that really resonated about rewinding to that conversation with Daniel and thinking like, I already had this idea, just hadn't got there at this point. So yes, I would always encourage people to talk online about their experiences, and you've brought something up really interesting there.
Of anything, because, and you said a couple of things there as well, like, so the first thing was you had me thinking about the online space, the high touch, high net worth business with a premises in the middle of central London with a lovely catered lunch, no doubt. Just for 1 second, let's just critically think. If they just got rid of that premises and that bullshit trying to impress you, well, how much less could they charge their customer? I don't care how much money someone's got. Like this, for want of a better expression, big wank, which is all ego driven. And you see it everywhere. But people, because it's just the way it's done, whether you're high net worth or not, even if you're someone who's paying into, I see a lot of people our age or our age group, you're a little bit younger than me, but same bucket of people, who are the working middle class, who make up the biggest chunk of society at the moment, who the advice now is just keep it really simple. Just invest into an ETF with Vanguard and you get your reliable 8%. It costs you 0.5% and you do it yourself and it's fine. But there's still this fee attached for because it's online, right? There's a fee that's significantly less because it's online. You don't need the big premises. And for you guys now, like the three of you are all in different places. I'm assuming you do most of your meetings like this. The overheads,
it's all digital,
everything's digital. Starting your newsletter, free, digital. The overheads in today's world is so much lower. And Jeff Booth talks about this, that everything technology reduces the cost of doing business. So for someone who's a high net worth individual, just stop for a minute and think how much cheaper it could be if you didn't rock up to this multi-million-dollar piece of real estate in London to have an in-person meeting. And I hope that COVID has woken people up to a lot of this stuff. It's the same as the conversation I have with people now. It's like, you could go buy a business for 100 grand or 200 grand or whatever, however much you can buy a business for these days, or you can start writing a newsletter for free and have no overhead. Like, it's that conversation. It's just wake up. So yeah, I completely agree. So we could sit here for hours, as Bitcoiners often do. But is there anything else you want to share?
Amy, if I could do something for a moment, I'd love to just turn the table slightly on the conversation and learn a bit more about your journey. And could you explain to me what you think the biggest benefits for you of having a podcast have been?
Podcast is still pretty early. That you will, I think, be episode 10. So you're the double figures. Okay. Podcast specifically, I couldn't give you too much of an answer other than the light bulb I had was I kind of went into this limbo through COVID times because I just didn't want to be online. I didn't want to be talking to people because people were not in a good space and everything was so heated and divided. It still is, but I like to think I've got better at navigating that. I've got a bit more resilience behind me now. For me, being online, well, first of all, I started nearly 10 years ago and I was literally just sharing my reasons for wanting to have a business online because I wanted to travel more. I'm a different person 10 years later, but the benefits to me of, sorry, did you ask the question, benefits of being online or benefits of Bitcoin?
No, you're morphing it into being online, which is just as interesting. I was asking about the podcast, but you're basically saying it's a little early to say specifically.
Probably a bit early.
What is the benefits of being online? Like, what have you personally felt and how does that help the listener out there?
I guess realizing that
I don't know the answer to this question either, so I'm just intrigued personally.
Meaningful work. So unearthing the fact that just by sharing yourself, so I started because I wanted to travel. I wanted to make, I wouldn't say I wanted to make fuck you money, which some people call it. Dale on my last episode called it that. But it was, I want to earn above average money.
What a fucking legend.
Above average money because life ain't cheap. And my parents weren't in a situation where they were going to be particularly well off. I've since lost my stepfather and my mum, realizing that situation, all the things that millennials, if they haven't had conversations with their parents about money, don't wait until you're forced, like we both have been. But the benefit to me is realizing, an average salary these days online is peanuts. Like, you can replace your salary, the average salary, very simply. Is it easy? No. But the benefit of being online is just there's no real downside to me other than I do miss working in a team. That's the only downside I can find. There is no there's really very few downsides to earning more money, to being completely geographically free, and to having the confidence and fulfillment that comes from just sharing yourself. And I don't think enough, it comes back to the not good enough thing. I don't think enough people realize that just by existing, having interests, having life experiences makes you of value to lots of other people. And we live in a world now where you can actually quantify it, but still people don't want to get out there. They don't want to just put themselves out there like you did. And I've got personal friends who have done it, who have gone viral all of a sudden, and now they have a full-time career and book deals, and it's insane what it can turn into. But it doesn't have to be that. It can actually just be having the awareness, the skill sets to turn you into the brand. It goes back to the thing that you said earlier about you are a brand regardless. And it's always a contradiction, because if you chase the money, you'll make money. There's a ton of ways to make money online. But I think what I love most about my own journey, and it's turned into my brand, is that just by being a human being, that is the world we now live in, where your unique set of experiences and interest is as a creator, I guess is the better word for it. We live in a creator economy. And I think that's where the world is going with education. So my whole thing around learning all the things we didn't learn at school, more and more people are homeschooling, more and more people are building these communities where they can choose what they want to learn in 4 hours a day instead of 8, where their child comes home exhausted.
Sick.
And
yeah, or they come home sick,
whatever. Like it's a very long-winded. The podcast specifically, I'll tell you in a year. But I've chosen podcasting because it plays to my strengths, which is what I also coach other people on. Just having conversations is kind of more of my jam than sitting down and doing a structured YouTube video. But there's a ton of ways people can do it. I think writing is a great way to start for sure. But it ultimately, very long-winded answer, having some degree of meaning to the work you do, and the opportunities it can open up, even if you don't get paid for that content creation, is like a public CV, which for you it's 100% been.
Yeah, and I'd recommend anyone to do it. Something that resonated from what you said that is useful. The energy that you put out in the world, you get back. And no one understands this properly. I'm figuring it out myself at the same time. There are so many potential customers on the street that is the digital world that you can put out whatever energy you're interested in and feel like, and other people will find themselves in touch with you. And I think that's something that doesn't necessarily come into, when you look onto YouTube or how to make $1 million a month on YouTube, they do not talk about this at all. No. And, some social media gurus will look at your social media and they'll be like, oh, you don't get enough engagement, or you don't have enough followers, or you're not posting the right pictures. And, I had an example recently, a coach that I'm just entering a 3-month thing with. She had someone analyze her social media and it was not deemed as good enough. And therefore someone didn't sign up for her program. But what they didn't realize is they were comparing it to someone else's program that, she literally makes 10x more money on the back end. They just don't know. And that's because of her energy that she's putting out. And people get attracted to her energy and they're willing to spend the money. And she does it in the shadows in some ways. Just that's the front end that draws the right kind of character in. Fascinating. There's always too much to talk about, isn't there?
I think the best way to describe that from a Bitcoin lens is don't trust, verify. And I'm always trying to say this to people about the coaching space, because everything's going online. People are investing in coaches. That's the industry I'm mostly in. And, even therapy, that kind of thing has become so normalized for our generation. And we can all do it for each other. Anyone can be a coach. Like there's actually not a lot of legislation around it. There's there's gold standard bodies that exist. But, that's what, there's so many connections with Bitcoin, or the ethos around Bitcoin, don't trust, verify. I don't give a shit if someone's got 2 million followers on Twitter. I know of accounts that have got that kind of a following, and they're run by teenagers that are broke. They're not making any money. You can you can make multiple 6, 7, 8 figures with no following, because like you say, people are doing it in the shadows. It's more important that they're getting the results than it is that they've got this perfectly curated Instagram feed. I do rant about that quite a bit on my social media.
It's annoying though. The other thing that you said that I just wanted to touch on is being yourself. There's no doubt in my mind at least, that the last 3 or 4 years has really opened my eyes to like, well, what is real? What's not real? And in particular, I went to a protest in Melbourne that was an anti-lockdown protest. And we were there very specifically because we didn't agree with what the government was saying. And there was all these retarded rules in place. And, anyway, there was thousands of people there. And that night, I watched a video clip on Channel 7 or whoever it was saying that hundreds of protesters had collected together and there'd been someone attack a horse or something. There was people with prams, there was families, there's a whole community of people that got together and said we disagree with what's going on. And the police kettled them around the Shrine of Remembrance in the park in Melbourne. And Loz and I were there with our small baby at the time. The information that was given to the wider public through the broadcasting networks that night was factually incorrect. There was not hundreds, like 100 people got together and beat up a police horse. There were thousands of people there. And that was one of the first times in my life I was like, wait, hang on a second. That's literally wrong. What else is wrong? And, that's a whole different conversation in itself.
Yeah.
But to bring it back to having a digital character online and being yourself, that is absolutely what I need. I don't need some doctored kind of story of the truth that's clearly serving, financial interests that are completely out of my control.
Yeah.
No, thank you. I need someone to tell me what their experience is.
Yeah.
What do you know that I don't know? How can I help you get better? How can you help me get better? What can we learn together? These are fundamental questions that help me create friendships and relationships that benefit my life.
Yeah.
And you're like, happy days. Let's do more of this. And it's probably quite a good way to end it, to be honest. But I love what you're doing as a result. So thank you.
It's proof of work. It's the don't trust, verify and proof of work that I see as a really valuable ethos and concepts to take from Bitcoin, if nothing else, because it's money that represents the best kind of human action. Whereas at the moment we have this monetary system that just is stealing the human energy. And again, another rabbit hole we could go down, but thank you. Appreciate it. I haven't had the tables turned on me like that before, but agree with all of that. So yeah, everybody follow Jake, check out what he's achieved and done with created for himself or manifested for himself. Where can people find you? Most active?
I spend too much time on Twitter. Jake is at Jake BTC Advisor.
Yeah.
Or just head straight to our website, which is www.thebitcoinadvisor.com. That's ER, advisor with an ER.
The American version. Is it? Is that ER? Yeah.
I think that's the English version, actually. Yeah.
Is it? Oh, okay. Fair enough. That's okay then. Thank you so much.
To be honest, I've not checked, but that's what I thought.
Yeah, that'll do.
No, my pleasure. Amy, thank you for having me on.
Awesome stuff. Good luck with everything in the new role. And we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
Hello, my friend. As someone who's not the best at finishing the things they start, thank you so much for making it to the end of this podcast. I hope you found it helpful. Maybe it piqued your curiosity on something new or even just made you smile for a few seconds. If any of those things apply here, then all my regular tech challenges and tantrums are well worth it to get this to you. If you heard anything at all that you think could help just even one other human being, there's a couple of things you can do that I would really and truly appreciate. Firstly, you can follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. On most podcast platforms, this is usually just a case of hitting a follow button or a plus sign on the main show page. This means you'll never miss an episode, which is hopefully a win-win for us both. Secondly, if you're feeling really generous, you can leave me a 5-star rating or review wherever you're listening. And lastly, feel free to share an episode with a friend on social media with any thoughts, feedback, suggestions, or even criticism. It's okay, I can take it. Just tag me using the handle @AmyTaylorSays to make sure I see it and can thank you personally. Any or all of these things genuinely mean more human beings see and hear these conversations. So again, thank you for being here and helping me with my mission with BU Get Paid to help as many people as possible know themselves, know money, and be happy. See you next time.